Welcome everyone to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, the J.R. Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, the Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday night, August 9th, 2023. And if it's Wednesday night,
It's definitely Black Men Speak. So let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music, also to Forest Films in our own studio for providing our virtual studio, and to my co-host Tommy Duncan for the great work that he does with bringing us great guests every week and great topics. With that being said, Tom, let's jump into it and get started because we have another packed show for our listening audience.
we want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. We're going to have a jam-packed show tonight and a lot of interesting conversations. So we want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. So tonight, our special guest and main speaker this evening will be Gere Feltus, MD, and she will be talking about the model for high academic achievement in Black America. And we'll be excited to share her history, her background, her thoughts, and kind of her model on how we can turn things around, Jimmy, that we've talked about so many times about how our kids get so far behind in academia and therefore having to close the gap when it comes to real world performance. But before we go into that, folks, we have a couple of interesting stories that I think everybody probably should have seen by now, of course. Jamie Foxx has been in the news. Of course, everybody knows recently that he had some health issues, but
Correct.
he made a tweet that rubbed some folks the wrong way and had to make a public apology on, I guess, it's X, not Twitter, about a statement that he made that a lot of folks are kind of scratching their heads on. We're going to talk about that briefly tonight. And then also, anybody who's been watching media of any form probably has seen what's happened in Montgomery, Alabama, the Riverboat Rumble. And so there's some interesting conversation pieces and messaging behind that we'd like to talk about this evening as well.
True. So let's get started.
So, Jimmy, let's first start off. I think we have a birthday of a famous person. No
Yes.
longer with us, Jimmy, but we do need to at least acknowledge and honor.
One of my favorite singers of all time, Miss Whitney Houston. She would have been 60 today, Tom. I know we normally announce the celebrity deaths and great ones when they pass away, but this time I thought we should make an exception and honor her on her birthday because she certainly passed away far too soon. Whitney, you're missed.
Absolutely. You have an entire fan base that is missing you and mourning you, and we honor you as we do and protect our sisters on Black Men Speak. So we
Yes,
want
we
to honor
do.
you on this day. And we will now move forward to the apology that happened within this past week. Jamie Foxx, of course, as we are all aware, had some health issues, came out trying to get back to the get back to work, get back to moving. And, he made a statement in social media. And unfortunately, there were some groups who took exception to that. There are some questions about it. And just so folks will know, we have an image of what that tweet is. And we're going to talk about that for a few minutes, Jimmy.
Well, Tom, we've had quite a few celebrities who have made statements um, and they had to walk things back for the sake of their career, really. And it's sad when you have to do that. I've read the statement. I didn't find anything wrong with the statement. Jamie Foxx is entitled to the views, but we've had people recently like Kevin Hart, Kanye, DMX, and
Nick Cannon.
yes, Nick Cannon, Lil Kim, who've all had to walk statements back for their career. And at the root of this, Tom, is they're complaining about the industries that they're in, the entertainment industry, the record industry, and how they're having to do certain things that they don't want to do in order to make money, just to work. And it's sad that a lot of them, I think, feel that that the work that they're doing is damaging to their community. But it's either you either do that and sell your soul to the devil, or you don't work.
Well, Jimmy, I think at the end of the day, if we really look at this, it's all about leverage. And, we've talked about this on a lot of different occasions, Jimmy. When you don't employ your own people, when you don't control the industry, when you are not controlling your own destiny, these things happen. All of these folks that we're talking about happen to be in the entertainment industry, whether that be in movies, music, and or other forms of entertainment. But these are areas where other folks control their ability to be able to work. Jamie being an entertainer, being an artist, he makes movies, he makes music, but that industry is controlled by another group of people. The same way Nick Cannon and or Ye or whatever he calls himself now, same industry. So when you are in an industry that are controlled by another group of people who may or may not have your best interests in mind, these types of things happen. And in a certain sense, Jimmy, I mean it's work, but it's also economic oppression.
Look, Tom, we can't tiptoe around this. We know that they do not have our best interests at heart. It's all about making money and the destruction of the black community, which they participate in. So, and if you speak out against that, then yeah, you are canceled in this culture.
Well, the
So
question is, what are they speaking out against? Or in this case, what did Jamie speak out against such that he had to roll out an apology for what? I mean, again,
I didn't see it either, Tom.
I want to pull this back up again. They killed this dude named Jesus. What do you think they'll do to you? Fake friends, fake love. So he's speaking to people who, there's a song that was, I think, released by the OJs years ago,
hmm
Smiling in Your Face.
Yes, backstabbing.
Exactly.
So, well, Tom, you know what? It could have been worse. He could have been like me and spread the word that Jesus was black. So that would have really rocked the boat. But
Well,
I mean,
Jimmy, they kind of said that in a way, in a manner of speaking, in the Bible. The last time I read the Bible, I believe they said that the skin was like burnished brass and hair like lamb's wool. I don't
yes,
know too many other group of people with hair like lamb's wool and feet like burnished brass.
that is correct, Tom. And so we're not going to do a biblical history study on this show, but I mean we can, and certainly I have researched the Bible enough. I mean I can definitely make the do a proof to prove that Jesus was black based on the references from the Bible, not just that one verse, Tom, but other verses and the family lineage. But on that topic, we do wish Jamie Foxx well. I'm sorry that he was put in that position to have to take back a statement that was very innocent, shouldn't have caused anybody any harm. But I mean, that's the cancer culture that we live in. But you're right, Tom. It also calls for the need for us to take more economic control of our situation. As much money as we spend on music, on the entertainment industry, on Hollywood, um, we should be more of a power broker than just the pawns on this chessboard.
Agreed. And as a result, we as consumers, we as stakeholders, we as folks who are on the front end or the behind the scenes have to take a little bit more responsibility. When folks mess with ours, we mess with them.
That is true, Tom. So we still represent over 50% of the movie tickets sold in America, and I'm not sure the numbers are on music, but we know the impact that I think hip hop is one of the number one genres in the world. So we know the impact we have there, and we're not in control of any of it.
And that's where we have to make a change, Jimmy, even if that means making a short-term sacrifice in order to make a
I agree.
long-term gain. We take something out of the quintessential American playbook, and that's what we call an economic embargo. Because at the end of the day, I've always said people pay attention to two things in this country: money and military.
That is true. So let's move on to Montgomery, Tom, the home of the capital of the Confederate and the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. Let's talk about the
Okay,
video.
absolutely, Jimmy. So we had something that was somewhat of a serious matter. I'm pretty sure that everybody should by now have seen it. But In Montgomery, Alabama, there was what we consider to be a pretty harmless situation where they were out on the side of the river, and there was a security guard who was trying to, in essence, do his job in terms of making sure that things were available for the commercial boats to come in. And
Right.
he had a conversation with someone who had a pontoon, a smaller boat that was in the way. He was trying to tell them to move out of the way so that they could make sure that the commercial boats come in. And I guess they didn't really take too well to that. And this one guy, happened to be a brother, ended up getting attacked by, I think, 6 people, give or take.
Well,
And
Tom, I don't know their motivation, but I'd imagine that if I had to speculate, they probably felt that he was out of his lane, a black man telling
as a
white people
security
what to
guard,
do.
how was a security guard out of his lane trying to do his job?
Well, he's black, Tom, telling white people what to do.
What
We're still talking about Montgomery, Alabama here. So, not to disparage people in Alabama because I know they've come a long way, but still, you still have these attitudes where people still feel that people have a place in a lane, and that he was out of his place for speaking out and trying to command to white people what to do.
Well, Jimmy, at the end of the day, it evolved and it turned out to be probably one of the leading stories because somebody jumped him and then it was on and popping.
Yes. The good thing is that there were no reported injuries. No one had to be
No
hospitalized.
deaths, no shooting.
So we're thankful for that.
But
But
but,
I'm
but,
amazed, Tom, that
but this is what happened, Jimmy. The guy took his hat off and it was on.
it was on.
This is
Um,
literally what happened.
so the according to the police report, their findings were there was no racial component to this. I'm not sure how there wasn't a racial component to it, but I'm not sure what they were investigating. But that was the conclusion of their investigation from the Montgomery Police Department.
So he got jumped by 6 people. And then the cavalry came in. I mean, we talking about the Buffalo Soldiers, literally, because as he was having a conversation with this group, and then he got jumped, there were some other folks who were looking at this unfold. And then once they saw him get jumped, some other folks, some brothers and sisters, came to balance out the numbers. And once he got jumped, the folks who jumped him got jumped, and it was
Yeah.
a melee and a brawl. And at the end of the day, Jimmy, it has been not just a nationwide, but an international call of unity because when things like this happen, Jimmy, they usually don't work out so well. Sometimes folks end up getting hurt. Sometimes folks end up getting
Well, I'm
killed.
glad no one was seriously hurt or killed in this particular case. And I would agree that I hope all the parties involved can, once they calm down and cool off, can maybe come back later on and come together. Everybody apologize for their role, for their culpability in this, and set the example that this is not the way you deal with disagreements. It shouldn't evolve into a all-out fight, gang fight. So
Well,
let's hope that we can
you're
do
right,
better in the
Jimmy, but
future.
they had no, they shouldn't have jumped the man in the first place and none of
I
this.
agree, Tom. That's why I hope that when cooler heads will prevail, that later on they will come back. Hopefully, everyone's embarrassed by all of this and come back and paint a different picture, showing some unity, showing some acceptance and responsibility for your part in this, and apologizing to everyone that was involved. Everyone apologize to everyone. Shake hands, hug, and then let's get on with our business. With
Yeah,
that being said, Tom, we got a very serious issue tonight, one that's very dear to my heart,
but
which is
but but, but,
education.
but
Oh,
before
I'm
we do
sorry.
that, Jimmy, we will have to say this. We do have to uh, honor all the memes, all the stories, all the lighthearted comments that people have made about this, and hopefully make this a rallying cry that we've got to do better in this country.
Yes, we have to do better. So, with that being said, Tom, a very serious issue tonight, one that's very dear to my heart and your heart. We've talked about this many times on this show, to educate the education of our children, especially in our communities where if you take example like Baltimore, 5 black high schools, and there's not one student that can pass the state proficiency exam in math and English. In Washington D.C., you have some districts where only 2 or 3% of the kids can pass the state exam. And Tom, we have a high school dropout rate of over 50% for young black boys. And this is a national embarrassment, and we have to do a better job with educating and preparing our kids in the global economy where education and knowledge and skills and talent is everything. We cannot continue to allow this to happen. So we have a guest that we're bringing on tonight who was brought up in a home with a very strict father who took educating his kids very serious, and she's going to talk about her experience growing up, and then some of the things that she's passed on to her children, which I've heard are doing very well academically. So, Tom, with that being said, let's introduce our guest and get on with the show.
Welcome, Dr. Feltus, to Black Men Speak. We appreciate you taking time to visit with us this evening. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. Just honored to join you all this evening.
Good deal. Good deal. And Jimmy, thank you again for introducing her to our show. We're looking forward to kind of talking about your background and your family environment, how you've raised and how that's had an influence on you and the next generation, because it is an extremely important issue. So start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from, and then we'll let the story go from there.
All right. Well, like I said, I'm Gere Feltus. I am actually a native of Duncanville. Graduated from Duncanville High School back in the late 90s and grew up in a household. I was one of 5 girls. My dad was no boys. But he's all right. He's still alive. He's well taken care of. But we had, as you said, a father who was very intentional about making sure that we achieved some academic success. So I'm very grateful for that. But graduated from there and headed up north to Sherman. I went to Austin College, which is a small liberal arts school right in Sherman near the Oklahoma border. And that was kind of a culture shock, to be honest with you, because I went from a school that was very large to a college that is limited to 1,200 students total, so only 300 per class. I chose that university, though, or that college, because I knew at the time I wanted to be a physician. And what I was doing was I interviewed at a number of colleges, kind of took my college tours, and then really started looking at the numbers. And my question was, who had the highest matriculation rate into medical school? And at the time, Austin College was blowing everyone out of the water. More than 90% of their students who finished their pre-medical program matriculated into medical school within the first 2 years. And that was very impressive. And then they gave me money. So, then you choose that one, right? So I had a really good time up there. Didn't really know much about the school before going, but really got ingrained into the community there and got involved in the school. And then my second year, I was invited into the leadership program there. So they have a leadership institute. Training the future leaders of America is essentially what they were trying to do. And it was there that I got a lot of exposure to different leadership styles and started to think about things outside of medicine. But went on to medical school at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. So had a good experience there. And then after that, decided I wanted to go to a place that I have never been. I was not ready to move back home to Texas. And I thought, let me try something different. So I actually went to residency at the University of Maryland in Baltimore City, which Baltimore City is more 90% African-American in Baltimore proper. So that was a very different experience going from sort of suburban healthcare in North Carolina to going into the urban areas. Had a great time. I thought it was a great place to really nurture me as a trainee, and gained a lot of great experience there. I had my first baby and decided to come home to my mama. So moving back to Texas in 2011. And in 2009. And in 2011, I accepted my first real position out of residency as the medical director of the Mesquite Employee Health Center. So I'm the city physician there. That office was opened by the city of Mesquite and the Mesquite Independent School District. So we see the employees and all of the dependents on their plan, so all of their families. So we have about 8,300 lives on that plan. And we do full primary care. We have grown quite a bit, and we incorporate all of the things that you would normally get at any primary care office is what we do. What I really love about being there is that I get to, practice medicine, but also there was a lot of policy creation that came as part of the job as well, which was a little bit outside my wheelhouse. So when we think about things like how do you create a health plan to actually keep people healthy? Like if they cannot afford their diabetes medications, then they're probably not going to be healthy. And
Right.
then they're going to be missing work and they're going to be costing the plan more money. So how do we look at the issues actually facing our population and then tailor the plan to actually meet their needs? So that was actually my favorite part of the job. And so I have been there for 12 years and some change now, and we are still trucking along there. I spent a great deal of my time after returning, just getting that practice established and working really hard and I have 2 girls. So raising my girls. And I'd always, before that, been very involved in the community and hadn't been. And there was a hole missing for me. And I needed to kind of get myself ingrained back into doing some volunteer work. So several years ago, I found a nonprofit organization here in McKinney called City Church McKinney. And what they do is they pick up kids who are more at risk on the east side of town. And McKinney's a very affluent community. Most people would not know some of the things that these kids face. So I got involved with them, started helping to mentor some kids. And through that, started to meet a number of people around the community, got asked to do some other leadership things in the city. And before you knew it, I was elected to city council 2 years ago. So
Hey, congratulations.
well, thank you. So I've been serving for 2 years. We have a great mayor, George Fuller, and we've got a great council right now. I came in after a pretty tumultuous time where we had another African-American on council. Yep. And unfortunately, he was, voted out of office. And, our city really needed to heal after that.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. And we needed representation. And I think everyone in leadership understood that, we need more representation. As this community has grown, it's become much more diverse. And so, I was asked to step up and serve, and I've been happy to serve my community in that capacity. So that's a little short story.
We appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Yeah. And I have a family. We live in the Duncanville area. Matter of fact, I have a cousin who graduated from Duncanville High School a little bit after you did, but having grown up in Oak Cliff myself, when we look at where the flow of Black folk in Dallas were started, looking from my father's generation to my generation, and now we go from Oak Cliff. When I was coming up, it was Carter, Kimball, Roosevelt, Sock, and now it's moved down to Duncanville, DeSoto, Cedar Hill, and those areas, but not falling off the tracks too much. When you look at the demographics of a Duncanville High School and you look at the dynamics of your household, tell us a little bit about your household versus the neighborhood and the environment, and what drove you towards being so successful academically. Is that something that was the status quo in high school, in your neighborhood? Was that something that was primarily driven in your family environment? Tell us a little bit about how that worked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Duncanville was a different place back then. It definitely didn't look then the way it does now. So we were coming up during the time where the demographics were starting to shift much more to minority population, and that actually created a lot of tension in the schools. I mean, there were a lot of fights like between Ropers and African-American students, and there was a little bit of tension there. Overall, it was a good experience, don't get me wrong. But it was still a good academic center. It is a sports powerhouse. That's what they're known for. And they were still known for that back then. But still academically, I think it definitely was a place where I was well prepared. I grew up in a neighborhood that was pretty diverse, pretty diverse, but we were still the minority. I had good friends who were all sharp, kids, and that's pretty much a testament to our academic background, I believe. But I think a lot of the success really was just fundamentally what I got at home. My parents had an expectation. The expectation was you are going to do the best you can, and you have to treat every kid differently. I don't want to make it seem like they kind of blanketed all of us together, but I think my parents definitely understood where each of our talents lied and where our strengths were, and then they just tried their best to nurture that. But even for them, my father came from parents who had extremely high expectations because they were both educated. My grandfather was born in 1921, my grandmother in 1928, and both of them are educated. And that's
educated. What does that mean to you?
So my grandmother was a school teacher. So she's, she went to college. My grandfather went to college. They both pursued higher degrees. They expected their children to. They had 6 kids. All of their kids went to college. All of them graduated. And I believe all of them have at least a master's degree. My dad's older brother was the first African-American to get a PhD in mathematics from Tulane. So I come from a pedigree of people who understood the importance of education. Their background was in ministry. That's just what they did. And I think ministry is very closely, of course, tied to teaching. And so it was kind of natural for a lot of them to go into education as well. But my grandparents had high expectations. My parents did not accept mediocre work. My father was a mathematician as well. And I remember coming home with, the teacher gives you an assignment and they say, do all of the even problems. There was no even problems. We did all of the problems. And it had to be very neatly done, and you better show your work. And even better, if you erase, you better erase it all the way or you're starting over. Like it was pretty strict. But also my father was a minister at the church that I grew up in and taught Sunday school. So every Saturday he would prepare his lesson for Sunday school at the library, downtown Dallas. And he would drag all of us with him. And so for 3 or 4 hours, it was go find some books and go read. So it wasn't just Saturday, just sitting around doing nothing. We were taken to the library and expected to use our brains, So, they did set a good example. Now, I will say there was a point at which I got really frustrated with him because I got to my senior year and I was pretty involved. I was in student council and I was a section leader in the band and I was in all AP classes. And I came home with a B and he was like, I think you can do better than this. Crazy. I'm just trying to get out of here. And it made me mad enough to want to achieve better, right? Like, it just, I think he knew exactly which button to push for me to kind of push me along. But I would certainly credit my parents to being the reason why all of us have been more motivated. So I have 4 sisters. My oldest sister was the artist. She is now in television. She's a director in television. She does very, very well. My sister older than me is an accountant. I'm a physician. The one under me is an attorney. And then my baby sister is also a physician. So
okay.
It was definitely a household where we pushed each other, not competing with each other, but definitely pushed each other to do better.
And how much pressure was placed on you guys or you ladies growing up? I mean, you come from a family of successful, educated parents and grandparents.
Third generation at that.
Yes. And so did you look at that saying, wow, graduating high school, that's not going to cut it. We have to go on and do better than that to just keep up in this family.
Yeah, you do. I mean, there was not an option to not graduate from high school, and I tell people all the time, when we're talking about kids and, ensuring their academic success, some of it is just fundamentally, what are you telling them you're expecting of them?
Right.
Because if you don't tell them what you're expecting, they're not even going to reach for it. So at baseline, you should say, I expect you to get good grades, right? And I expect you to graduate from high school. That should be the fundamental, right? And my parents definitely, I wouldn't say they put like a ton of pressure on that, but it was just an expectation. You are going to do well and I'm going to help you get there, not just go do it yourself, but we're going to figure out ways to get there, So I think they did a really good job of that.
Why don't we do this since we are halfway through the show, Jimmy, let's acknowledge a few people that we have on the chat line who are listening to us. We want to thank Brother Asar Kabelan out of the Austin area of the African Genius Podcast. Thank you for joining us this evening. As always, good to see you, my brother. Ms. Audrey K. Booker, how's it going, cuz? We want to thank you for joining us this evening out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Appreciate your comments there earlier today during the show. Brother Frederick V. Roberts Esquire out of the Prairie View area. Welcome, good brother. Always good to see you. He is also an administrator, an academician as well. One of the smartest brothers that I know. Of course, he's also an alpha man, so that's to be expected. Edward Willis, thanks for joining us as well. He's also been a special guest on our show as well. So thank you for joining us, Edward, as well. Ms. Tanya Hall, thank you for joining us this evening as well. She also has a morning news show every weekday as well. So we want to thank her for joining us as well. So what we would like to do is invite everyone to continue to make your questions and or thoughts known on the chat line, or if you want to call in and ask a question.
Yeah, let's post a phone number, Tom, so if people want to call in, they can. Let me see if I can find it.
Okay. And so we want to thank everyone for joining us this evening as we continue to move forward with the show. So going back to your storyline, so obviously the bar was set very high, expectations were set very high. We look at not just for young girls, but young boys. The dynamics have changed a little bit. The expectations are going to be a little bit different from household to household. We definitely understand that. But as Jimmy and I have talked about on many of our shows, it's a challenge because I think you're fighting against other forces. For instance, the greatest forces when we were growing up, typically your parents, church, and school. Now you're competing against mass media, whether you're talking about social media, whether you're talking about the images of young black boys and young black girls on the television and or on the movies. And in a lot of cases, expectations for excellence and brilliance aren't set very high. And a lot of these forces have a great deal more influence than sometimes parents and or the school. When we talk about church, a lot of our young people aren't vested in the church, for instance, as the earlier generations. What are you seeing out there, and what are you seeing not just as a physician who deals with family matters, also as a councilwoman? What are you seeing out there?
You know, I agree with you for the most part. I still think the home is the fundamental resource that kids are going to have the best development under.
It has to be.
Absolutely, no question, even with all of these outside factors. But, you know, thank God we didn't grow up in the age of social media. I mean, it's really tough for these kids because they're constantly comparing themselves to everyone else. And you see a little bit of both, right? You see some where there's a pressure to achieve more, and sort of that feeling of failure or that imposter syndrome can certainly set in for a lot of these kids because they don't feel like they're kind of meeting that mark. On the other end of that, you see people who aren't really focused on achieving, right? And they make it look like you can be one in a million that make it by having a YouTube page, or that you're going to be a gamer and then suddenly you're going to be a multimillionaire from being a gamer. And that's just not typically the case, right? So we have a little bit of both, which is a little difficult. You're right. I think the church definitely is not as much, you know, for us, we were in church all the time, you know, and there was a lot of encouragement even there to succeed. There was an expectation from the people around you to succeed. Now things are a little bit different. Church is hip, you know, and the focus is a little bit different sometimes. But still fundamentally the household. I mean, even when I was volunteering with City Church McKinney, you know, one of the things that I noticed is that the kids who had parents that were involved, who attended the parent teacher meetings, who even came to City Church to see what we were doing, those kids were well adjusted and they just overall were doing better, you know? So home is still important. Home is still important. Yeah.
This is correct, but let me push it a little bit further. Even when you look at the home environment, that's a little bit different than the latter part of the 20th century. One, we know the dynamics are a little bit different because we don't have as many two-parent households than we did. But even for those in which you do have two-parent households, the engagement between the parents and the children are different. Why? there's this thing called a mobile phone. And
Mhm.
quite frankly, unlike when I was growing up, where when we ate dinner together at the table, and we talked about what was going on at school. We talked about what was going on, with friends and how was everybody doing, so on and so forth. Nowadays you have folks eating, they get their pizza, their tacos, or whatever the case is. They go to their room, they're on their smartphone or they're on their laptop or whatever their mobile device is. And you literally see a lack of engagement, or let's say a loosening of the engagement in a lot of cases between parents and their children. I mean, in my generation, it started with the latchkey kid because we started watching more television. Now technology has become democratized. And so kids are spending
Too much time.
10
Hours.
plus hours literally looking at a screen and not engaging with their family members.
Right. Yes.
And that has to have an influence when you talk about that engagement, the expectations that are set, and the outcomes of our children.
Or just they're feeding their brains with something useful besides the junk that TikTok and YouTube provide, except for this show now.
Of course. Of course. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the phone has certainly changed everything, that personalization of the phone and the access to, all of these programs that we spend endless hours on. It takes away from the desire to do things like cook for your family. So you all sit down together and talk, even that is disappearing. I think life is definitely faster paced, even if we're talking outside of even phones. My kids are in sports. The way they run these kids for these sports teams, it's busy. It's a busy life.
It's a bit, yes, year round now.
Yeah, and you end up eating on the road, trying to get to practice or trying to get to the next game or whatever. So if your kid is in more than one sport, then you end up being busy. And I think busyness has been kind of, another issue that we often will see that takes away from that time with family. But certainly social media has changed the game, no question.
So let me ask you this as a two-part question. One, do your girls ever accuse you of being old-fashioned? And then two, what would they say is different, from when you were growing up versus what they have to go through now?
Um,
I'm pretty sure you shared stories of your life with them.
I'm a dinosaur. My kids think I'm so old. Because I tell them we are the generation that was first exposed to the internet. Like, we didn't have the internet. We had the encyclopedias that you had to go through to find information, right?
They were books.
I had World Book. I couldn't get Bicentennial, but
a real book. So they think it's weird that we had to actually pick up the phone, that the phone was plugged into the wall, that we didn't have a cell phone when we were in high school.
A card catalog.
Yeah, we had a Rolodex, and that's how you found people's number. You actually memorized numbers back then. So life is really, really different for them than it was for us. But still, I think I don't let my kids have social media. We don't have like tons of fun. They're still younger, and I think when they're younger, it's easier to control some of these things. I have a 12 and a 14-year-old. My oldest just started high school today. So we'll see how those things.
Congratulations.
Thank you. We'll see how those things change over time. But we're living in a completely different age. They have access to information immediately. My kids had to sit there and really teach me a lot of things. I am fortunate to say my kids have been fairly self-directed because it's so much easier to find information for them than it is for us, so it takes less for me. My only thing is, if your grades aren't up, I have to help you study, and they don't want that to happen, so but beyond that, they're pretty self-directed because they have access to all the information.
One thing that Jimmy and I have discussed over the years, especially when it comes to education, when it comes to academic performance, is culture.
Yeah.
What you do, how you do things. You've talked about a model from when you grew up. Jimmy had, his model when he grew up. I had the same. My father was an educator. When we look at culture and what we have to do in order to turn the corner, so that our kids are no longer, regardless of, we know they're going to be some poorer school district, not in terms of economics, but in terms of results. We're going to have some districts that aren't doing so well. Everybody can't go from South Dallas to McKinney or Frisco and change their address, but that doesn't mean that they cannot perform at the top of their class. When you look at changing the narrative on our children, not individually or in a household, but as a culture, as a community, we understand that begins with the parents. Sometimes the parents don't know where to start. Right. What are some of the recommendations that you would make? Because everybody can't say that they came, for instance, from a family that even had a parent that graduated high school, much less graduated college, much less 3 generations of that, in order to say, you know what, maybe I didn't get this far, but I want to make sure that my kids are doing the best that they can, regardless of how mediocre or great their school is in terms of overall performance. If I can't just skip up and move to a McKinney or a Frisco or a Holland Park or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. Let me back up just a little bit and say this one thing. So my father's side of the family, very educated, right? So for generations. My mother's side was totally different. My grandfather, my grandmother, and my mother's side were not educated. I will say that I think, and this is going to apply more to your question, exposure to environments where there is some academic achievement going on helps to elevate everyone. Because once my mom married my father, she suddenly developed this, drive to learn. And she just finished a new certification as a nutritional counselor, right? So she has this hard drive to continue to learn. And she went back to school after she had 4 kids and went back to college and is still learning. So it did have an impact, not just on her, but her entire family, her brothers and sisters, their kids, same thing. But a couple of things I would say, because I work for the Mesquite Independent School District, I have access to teachers. They are primarily my patients. And I hear a lot from the teachers. And I think there's a couple of things that we can do as a community. One, support the teachers. Don't think that every teacher is your enemy, because they're not. Not every teacher is your enemy. Now, there are some serious problems in the education system. We need to do a better job of recruiting more African-American teachers. But having a good relationship with the teachers can help your kid tremendously, okay? Now, in terms of what we as a culture need to do a much better job of is showing up. Showing up is so important. When I several years ago, started going to the school board meetings here more frequently, and I cannot tell you how devastating it is to not see a single face of color in any of those meetings. And this is where policies are being made. This is where decisions on hiring staff are being made. It's really important that we just start, even if you don't feel like you have something to say publicly, having your face sit in the seat and then having conversations either before or after meetings with your school board members, with your superintendents, with the assistant superintendents, to some of the teachers and counselors that show up. That can be extremely influential in how they make decisions. But we've seen even here recently this huge push, anti-CRT. This is all that's been in the news for a while, right? All of this anti-CRT. And we all know that our kids are not getting enough teaching on the civil rights movement or African-American studies or anything. I'm teaching my kids get most of that from me, right? But you would believe otherwise if you look at the media. They will have you fooled into thinking that we're doing some crazy curriculum where these kids are being taught things that are not being taught, But if we don't show up and say, this narrative is a false narrative, and we need to do a better job of educating our kids on their history, they're never going to get it, okay? One of my biggest concerns when I moved to McKinney was I looked at the achievement gaps between African-American students, and I'm not talking about low-income African-American students. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you look across the board at every level of the socioeconomic status, you will see some deficiencies in terms of academic achievement between children of color and everybody else, okay? So I started showing up to the school board meeting because I know how important it is to recognize that and to make it a priority to address that. There was a study that was done back in 2018 that said that if your kid by 3rd grade had one teacher of color, they were 13% more likely to go to college. If they had 2 teachers of color, they were 38% more likely to go to college.
Okay, stop right there. What's the correlation and where did the data come from again?
This was a study, and I'll have to pull the source, but it was done in 2018.
Okay.
And so what they were looking at, especially in these areas where the kids are, you have African-American kids who are the minority in a school district, okay? And at the time, my kids were at an elementary school where they were not gonna have 1 teacher of color. And that was a big deal for me, okay? But 13% more likely to go to college if you had 1 teacher of color. 38% if you had 2 by the 3rd grade. And so one of the things that you have to be really cognizant of is an introduction to someone who looks like them early.
We're talking about, and if I'm hearing you correctly, this is not these are for Black students, not all students.
But there's other studies that suggest that even for white students, to have teachers of color is important, because it teaches them empathy, right? It teaches them how to respect someone in authority who's a person of color. It teaches them how to engage with someone who is of a different culture, a different background than them. They're more well-adjusted if they have more than just white teachers.
Okay.
Right.
Are you familiar with Chicago Urban Prep and
Yes.
their story?
Mhm.
Okay. And I'm still very disappointed that we allowed the takeover of Chicago Urban Prep. One of in my lifetime, one of the best and most successful schools for educating young Black boys. When it seemed like the system has given up on educating Black boys, give us your feedback on what you think about the Chicago ISD taking over Chicago Urban Prep when they have a 8 or 9 year history of graduating 100% of their young Black boys and sending them off to college. And I don't know of any other school in America that can say that.
Right. And then it declined, right? Right after they took over. Is that correct?
Yes, this year, now that they've taken over, it is definitely the academic success of that school has dropped off and declined, which is sad now.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly what that's attributed to specifically, right? So we look at a number of things. You look at the staff, you look at the curriculum, you look at the leadership, right? You look at mentorship programs. We look at after school activities, access to daycare after school or childcare after school. I mean, there's a number of factors that all go into it, and including parent training, right?
Well, I think one of their biggest successes is that they didn't make excuses.
Right.
They set the bar really high.
Yep.
In fact, there's a book called Losing the Race. If you get a chance, you may want to go read it. Where this Stanford professor basically took a year off and went through a lot of schools across America to see what was the minimum grade that you could bring home. And he sorted this out by race. And unfortunately for Black boys, it was a D. So if your parents will allow you to bring a D home, then they're not expecting very much from you. And he also cited in his book, in his study, that these attitudes are the same thing with teachers.
Oh, yeah.
That young Black boys are the most successful in pre-K and kindergarten and 1st grade, but by 6th grade, they're in the back of the class and they're hoodlums. So how do you go from being the most aggressive and the most successful to being the worst students in a 5 or 6 year period? And he cited that a lot of that is just teacher expectation. They set the bar really low for Black boys.
Yeah. I have girls, thankfully, and my sisters all have boys, right? And I hear their stories about how difficult it is for them to make sure that they keep that level of expectation elevated. Once again, you have to be very engaged with the teachers. Once again, this is one of those areas where I think having exposure to different teachers of different backgrounds can be helpful, because if you see a face that's like yours, you know the saying, Black teachers more likely are going to understand how to deal with young Black men. We talk all the time about the pipeline to prison, right? And I'm not saying that it's just Black teachers. I mean, there definitely are white teachers that have all the skills that they need as well to be culturally competent and be sympathetic and to understand exactly what tools are needed to help to ensure their success. But once again, I do agree with you. I mean, it is definitely setting an expectation across the board, teachers and parents alike. You got to set the expectations and then be very consistent in executing the consequences of not abiding by the rules, right? And so sometimes what I've seen from my teachers that I treat as patients is that they start to get very frustrated because they feel like, they'll try to set an expectation that there's no follow through in terms of partnering with the parents. And then they start to give up. And I'm going to be honest, you guys know we don't pay our teachers enough.
We don't
pay them enough to do what they do. And across the board, we're seeing a lot of apathy from our teachers. We're seeing people exit the profession in droves.
Yes.
Because they just don't get paid enough to do what they do. They don't feel like they have backup to discipline the way they need to discipline. There's no backup from the parents. So people are discouraged. I mean, it's really unfortunate.
You bring up some very interesting points. I want to kind of summarize for our audience here as we have a little bit under 10 minutes left. We want to make sure we have time to wrap it up. But action items and/or summarizing what you have shared. One is support your teachers and lift them up because they do have an extremely hard job.
They do.
My father was a career teacher. I definitely know what that looks like because he came up during a time where teachers were among the most respected professions, in America. Now, not so much. One, show up to school, engage with the teachers, make sure that they see your face regularly as a parent, supporting what they do as you're supporting your child. Obviously, exposure for your children and giving them broad exposure to different things. Showing up to school board meetings as parents is extremely important because obviously, they are making decisions that are affecting your children directly. You talk to some of those things and being consistent on expectations when it comes to the consequences of action or lack thereof. Let me ask you this, kind of getting back on narrow before we get to the closing comments. You mentioned social media. Oh, let me acknowledge a couple of people who jumped online before our last acknowledgement. Brother Ed Gray, the commish, is online. I want to thank him for joining us. He has his weekly show, the commish radio show. I want to thank him for joining us.
Every Saturday, guys. Check it out.
Miss Carol Wilson, thank you for joining tonight. She made some comments there as well. And Miss Tanya Hall also said, excellent, no social media for your kids. Now, get into the whole social media thing. One of the things that you mentioned earlier in terms of the whole self-esteem thing is what I will call it. Because, again, when we were coming up, you wanted to be the cool kid. If you were the smart kid, you didn't really want to show it because you might get talked about. But now you're dealing with the elephant in the room, which is being the popular kid, getting thousands and thousands of likes and all this other kind of stuff, as opposed to being the smart kid. And sometimes that honestly becomes such a higher priority than doing well in school by being focused is getting the most attention on social media. And sometimes that can truly be a distraction. How do you handle that? Because, as a physician, not saying that you're a psychologist, but that's real talk when it comes to our kids and their performance.
Right. So, that's a loaded question. Let me say this. The overwhelming amount of influence that we see in social media has an impact psychologically on these kids.
Yes, it does.
Yes.
So we have seen an increase in the amount of anxiety, an increase in the amount of depression, an increase in the amount of eating disorders, both male and female. And it used to be something that we didn't talk about in the Black community because we just thought it didn't happen. It happens all the time now. We've seen an increase in suicide. So, there are psychological impacts that this has. And I think a lot of times we miss that when we're talking about kids who are struggling academically or kids who are behaving a certain way. They're behaving a certain way because they're trying to emotionally get to a place that they think is going to be more satisfying to them, right? We've got to be very careful to really identify when kids are struggling, all of the reasons why they may be struggling. And I would say that social media has a humongous impact on their emotional well-being, their psychological well-being. And some of these kids are really suffering with legitimate clinical depression, clinical anxiety. And if you don't resolve those issues, if you don't address those issues, their ability, their mental capacity is not going to be able to absorb the information they need, So, it's really important for us that we continue to have conversations that are directed around mental health and children. Young children, we're seeing this, adolescent and teens. It's really important that we see this. I, as a parent, have not let my kids get on social media precisely for that point. I mean, I think we all have been through, I don't know when, the beginning of time when everybody started going to school. Everybody wants to be the popular kid, right? It's never been fun to be the nerd who's excluded or the super quiet one that's always in the corner. So there's always this push to kind of be the popular kid, but it has really gotten way out of control because now it's more than just the school, it's worldwide. Now I have to have a presence everywhere, right? And so kids are doing things, posting things, spending time on the internet, trying to get likes, just trying to get likes, trying to get followers. And there's some evidence to suggest, of course, there are endorphins that are released if they see more likes and comments that are positive on their social media account. So it's like this feedback mechanism. They want more of that gratification, so they're going to keep doing it, right? There's actually,
the social media companies employ a large number of neuroscientists for that purpose to
Right.
figure out how to keep you coming back and searching for likes and clicks. And
right,
so we have to be, so you're doing the right thing to limit the exposure of
right.
your children because hours and hours and hours is wasted every day
It is.
on social media. But one more thing I'm going to add to your list is put your teachers, the teachers of your kids, put them on your contact, put them on speed dial. They spend 8-10 hours a day with your child. You should get to know them personally.
Absolutely. Each and every one of them. You
Each and every one of them.
Yeah, have a conversation. Here's where I think my kid has some strengths. Here's where I think they may need a little bit of help. Please reach out to me. Don't hesitate to call or email. If you think you need some help with some discipline, I will step in, be happy to do it. But no, I'm here to support you. Let's get this kid educated as best we can. Because you have limited time. We only have them for so long.
That's true.
We have Miss Celia Reese, who had a few comments here, and Brother Brian Robinson here as well. Welcome to you both. Brian made a matter of fact, let me make sure I don't miss Celia's comment. Agreed, teachers and parents need to be consistent with their kids. Brian has a comment here. This is how they get news, social media. So maybe the problem is more than social media itself. Do you have conversations about what's on social media? I'm assuming talking to the parents.
I'm sorry. Repeat that question for me.
Otherwise,
I guess he's talking about the content on social media. Is that the problem, or is it just social media in general?
Exactly.
Tom, I don't think there's any way to filter the content very well. If you expose your children to social media, they're going to get good content, they're going to get bad content.
Right. And the question he's asking is, are you having conversations with your children about the content on social media? Very similar to what we used to have with our parents.
I guess when you don't allow access to social media, there's not much to talk about, is there?
Yeah, but that's not going to happen 100%.
Well, and it's not zero social media, right? Like, so my kids, of course they want their own TikTok account. They don't have one. I have one, and I will sit there and we'll thumb through together. And, if we hit something that's a good discussion, we'll stop and talk about it. We talk about all the time, all the dangers of social media. Because I want them to be very aware. But I don't let them just navigate through social media by themselves. No, it's just that's not an option right now.
Another good comment here by Audrey Booker. A lot of issues have a lot to do with children starving for attention. Therefore, social media makes them feel like they are in a place of belonging and getting that attention.
You should get that from their parents, Tom.
I understand that, but
and that's all good until it turns negative. Until it turns negative, and that's where you really worry. Yeah.
Good deal. So we have about a minute left.
All the questions come in at the last 5 minutes, people. What's wrong with y'all?
So what we're gonna do, before we close out, we're gonna give you a minute to kind of make any closing statements that we might have. We want to thank you for joining us this evening. Obviously, we're gonna have you to come back and continue this conversation because we were getting really warmed up, and now it is time to go. So let me step back. Jimmy, if you have a statement, and then
the doctor will be back in a few months to talk about her work for Black History. So we're going to be looking forward to that. But other than that, Dr. Feltus, is your take the last couple of minutes and closing statements.
Listen, I will keep it brief. I'll just say that this is my plea to you all: get involved. I'm on the city council level. I'm not on the school board level right now, but we need a whole lot more people showing up, being present in your community, getting involved, get to know who's your leadership, and let's change the system. I mean, there's so many things that we would like to see better, but unless we all get involved and demand that it gets better, it's not going to change in our favor. So please show up, please vote. Please vote. Your local elections are the most important. They are the most influential, directly related to you. So please, please vote in these elections.
Very true.
And you have it there from the doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, have a good evening, and we will see you next week.
Yes, we'll see you same time, same channel.